And so when you see the people who are stuck living in the streets, begging for their, just a bite to eat, things like participating in parliament or voting are really not at the top of people's minds. So not that we don't have to fight for those things, but just like when we work with abused women here, first she has to have housing. She has to have a place to live, a place to put her head at night. Then we can figure out, how she's going to, become a self-sufficient woman who can exercise all of her rights. And I think that in many of these developing countries, people are still struggling with those very basic survival needs. And that has to happen first. And I agree, though, we have to make sure that in the process, women are part of whatever changes come to pass.
Can I say something? I hate to disagree with a fellow Egyptian woman at this time.
To disagree?
I don't actually believe in the sequentialism argument. I think the Egyptian revolution specifically has turned that argument on its head. People of all classes, starving and fed and clothed and naked came, and I think they very intelligently made the link between their substandard living conditions and corrupt governance on top. I think people see those issues as inextricably linked. It's brilliant that that connection was made. Egypt has had a very vibrant labor movement, and until now it had been a very apolitical movement. Only when the laborers got involved in the protests during the revolution did that really turn the wave and truly frightened the Mubarak regime that something was at hand. So the linking between the economic interests and the entire political situation of the country was made, is being made. I don't think that you can separate the two, especially in many of these exceptionally corrupt countries where there are tremendous wealth disparities. Oftentimes the elite are associated with the political elite. The economic elite are in bed with the political elite. People understand that. People are not stupid. You would get into any taxi cab in Egypt and everybody would be the most astute of political analysts in making this link. So I think that's there. As far as the question, there are multiple Susan B. Anthonys. The way to tackle these situations is multi-tiered. There is no one magical answer, and I think that there is a recognition for that. Education, legal and institutional reform, awareness campaigns, all of these things. And by the way, the education of women may be even more critical in all of this. It's not just about changing men's mindsets to allow them to view women as equals, but FGM, which is female genital mutilation, is mostly supported by women, not men. Something that's not all that known to the public. Mothers understand for whatever reason that this is a way to sort of guard the purity of their daughters, and oftentimes my mother had a clinic in one of the very poor neighborhoods, and oftentimes it was the mother that would bring their daughter in to have this done. My mother would always say no, of course. And the father would be rejecting it. So what is needed here is not just awareness to be extended to men, it's an entire societal change that we need.
I wonder when you were talking about, I've lost you, yeah, right, when you were talking about Facebook, it just struck me as something. I wonder if it's too simplistic to say it's generational as well. As each generation moves on, people have more awareness of the world about them, they've been out, that type of thing, where rights become a part of that as well. And I wonder if we can place any hope in that. Any thought?
I would hope so.
Yeah. I think about Saudi Arabia. I first went there about 25 years ago, and it's a completely different place today. It's still a long way from perfect as far as I'm concerned, but you don't get bashed for not wearing a hijab or something like that now. So, hi.
You might have to speak a little bit loud. It's not very loud.
No, it's not. No. They probably have to turn it on from the center, yeah.
Maybe you can project and we can repeat the question.
Hi, Margaret Rogers. I've worked in development in Iraq for several years, including working to empower women in the political process. I'm very encouraged by human optimism for Egypt, but there are lot of people, it was here in the United States, who are concerned about extremists filling in power vacuum, including a few days ago, Michael Schroyer, who was the head of Bin Laden unit with the CIA, wrote a column in the Washington Post saying he's absolutely convinced the extremists are going to fill the power vacuum. Can you speak to that threat, and do you believe will happen, or do you believe all these people that we are saying we want democracy will prevail?
Did everybody hear that question?
Thanks for the question. Look, I do think it's a legitimate concern, especially because many of these authoritarians, the way that they worked is to cultivate a dichotomy, right? It was either us or fundamental extremists that would be immediately at the helm if I leave. I am the guarantor of stability, of moderation. In reality, it was quite the opposite. Many of these governments actually not only supported the growth of Islamism, sectarianism, but even more fundamentalist Salafist movements. Believe it or not, I'm sure many of you heard about the New Year's Eve massacre of the church in Alexandria in Egypt that left 25 people dead and scores injured. Some of the documents that are being leaked now...
You should say actually that they were Christian, Coptic Christians as well.
Yeah. Right. So it was a Coptic Christian church, and Copts are Egypt's Christians. They're sort of the indigenous people of Egypt. They comprise 10 to 15% of the population. And so some of the documents now that people are rescuing from state security apparatuses, some of these documents are showing the explicit involvement of Mubarak's state security apparatuses in inciting this kind of sectarian strife. And in fact, the prosecutor is now investigating claims that the Minister of Interior, who is charged with protecting the country and maintaining stability, actually orchestrated this massacre. Egypt has been ruled with an emergency law for 30 years under Mubarak. What that emergency law is essentially martial law. It suspends basic constitutional protections. It was subject to renewal every 2 years by his rubber stamp parliament. Very coincidentally, every time we came close to that parliamentary review of the emergency law, a major terrorist act would pop up, would show up on the scene that would justify the need for security and for the security state. Sectarian issues, the Mubarak regime is the one that severely restricted the right to worship, severely restricted the rights of Christians to build churches or even to repair churches. So much of this was part of their argument for the status quo. This is why you need us, and this is why we need a police state in order to maintain the moderation of the region, in order to ensure that we don't produce extremist elements that threaten Western interests. Of course, the complete opposite is true. Mubarak's torture chambers are the ones that gave rise to people like Ayman al-Zawahiri, who, after failing in Egypt, moved to Afghanistan to wreak havoc there. You know, the Islamist movements have witnessed unprecedented popularity under the Mubarak regime and not the opposite. It was very much, he systematically excluded and marginalized all liberal forces. So that's number one. As a result, they became the most organized group, the Muslim Brotherhood, at least I can speak for Egypt, with a grassroots base. And really their tactics, their way of organizing and moving about was not political. They were very intelligent in concentrating a lot of their efforts in social services, where there were government vacuums in terms of medical care, in terms of basic social services. They stepped in to fill in that vacuum, and understandably, some people were sympathetic to them. But like I said, this revolution could have easily at any point taken a turn that way. It did not. Muslims and Christians were praying together in the square on Friday and then on Sunday, protecting each other. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is a very real force on the ground. They are not going to disappear quietly into the night, and I think it would be wrong and even delusional for anyone to think that they're not going to seek to assert pockets of influence. They surely will. That's their point. They want to see the increased Islamization of Egypt. Whether they actually want to dominate a new government, at this point it's not clear. They say they won't, they're not interested in fielding a presidential candidate. I don't think that they are. But this is why it's so critical to be very vigilant over this transition process. Already what's happening now is alarming because it shows that the military, I either deliberately or not deliberately, is giving Islamist movements a greater opportunity. Number one, they formed this committee which has 2 Islamists on it and no women. Why? Number two, the timetable that they've set for elections to be held. Parliamentary elections they've scheduled for June to be followed by presidential elections in August. Well, if you have elections that soon, the only 2 forces that are best situated to make any real gains are regime forces that are still on the ground and may reconstitute in another form, or the Muslim Brotherhood. Not because they have majority support. Multiple polls were conducted after the revolution that placed their support at 15–20% max, but because they're the most organized, because they've been doing this for years and years. So what's needed now, and what most Egyptians are calling for, by the way, and there are a set of core demands around which everybody agrees, is prolong the transition, give liberal parties a meaningful chance to organize, to reach out to constituents, abolish the emergency law. The emergency law banned peaceful assembly. It's still in power today, which means that parties can't hold rallies. After we had this revolution, ironically, we're still at a stage where technically, legally, you can be arrested if more than 4 people are assembled in the street.